3, 4.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. This is Jewish Talk, coming to you live from Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Also streaming on the iHeart and the iTunes app. We can be seen right now in the studio. Hello, I'm waving on my Facebook Live page, as well as the Facebook page at WHPC. So welcome. This program is later archived on Spreaker.com. Hi there, just in case you don't know, this rabbi is Rabbi Pearl. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It all depends on when you are listening or watching. And good morning to Harvey Kipnis. Welcome back. Today, we're going to go back some 139 years ago to 1880. Let me explain to you, this is a special date coming up tomorrow, Monday, July the 15th, on the Jewish calendar, is the Tammuz, the 12th day of Tammuz. That's the birthday in 1880 of the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. That's our Rebbe's father-in-law, who was born in 1880 and he passed away in 1950. This date, also 47 years later, when the previous Rebbe was 47 years old, this day also marks his liberation from the exile from a Soviet gulag. On the 12th day of Tammuz in 1927, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe was officially granted release from his sentence to exile to Kostroma. This was in the interior of Russia. And you're wondering, why am I discussing this with you today? Well, you'll find out as I say hello to Gene and to Louis Pushkin and to Dr. Kilshevsky. I think Dr. Kilshevsky is the alter ego of Dr. Kildare. So, 27 days earlier, the previous Rebbe, had been arrested by the agents of the GPU of the Communist Party. Why was he arrested? For his activities to observe Judaism throughout the Soviet Empire, and was sentenced to death. God forbid. Due to international pressure that forced the Soviets to commute the sentence to exile and subsequently to release him completely. So the actual release took place on Tammuz 13. And so this tomorrow, Monday, and Tuesday, Tammuz 12 and 13 is celebrated as a festival of liberation by the Chabad Lubavitch community. I share this with you, my friends, because even though it happened to a particular individual of a particular community in a particular location, but the idea of standing up for religious freedom in Soviet Union is something that still reverberates today as we see. And I want to share with you in honor of the previous Rebbe, and for us, some inspiring thoughts from the teachings of the previous Rebbe, and for us to go into our main topic, which is mental health is a Jewish issue too. So here are some insights that help us to appreciate our role in life. And again, I want to say hello, those who are tuning in, those who are listening. We appreciate you watching us and listening in. So first, this little story about a mud hole. Story is told, this is the previous Rebbe telling us a story with a moral as well. It's about a wealthy businessman and a coachman. They arrive in a city one Friday afternoon. The rich man settles down, of course, at the best hotel in town. And the coachman, he goes off to his humble lodgings. He goes to Motel 6. Now, they both wash up and dress for the Sabbath, and then they set out for the synagogue for evening prayers. On his way to shul, the businessman, who comes out of this fancy hotel, comes across a large wagon which had swerved off the road and was now stuck in a ditch. Rushing to help a fellow in need, the businessman climbs down into the ditch and begins pushing and pulling and pulling and pushing at the wagon together with the hapless driver. But for all his finesse and his abilities to face the most challenging of business deals, this guy, when it came to extracting wagons and teams of horses from this muddy ditch, this businessman was hopelessly out of his depth. No pun intended. After struggling for an hour in knee-deep mud and schmutz, he succeeds only to ruining his best suit, or his Sabbath clothes, and of course he also amasses a most impressive collection of cuts and bruises, and getting the wagon even more impossibly embedded into the mud. So this poor guy, this rich guy, finally drags his limping body to the synagogue, and he arrives just like a minute before the start of the Sabbath. Okay. Meanwhile, the coachman, he arrived early in the synagogue, sat down to say a few prayers. At the synagogue, he found a group of wandering paupers, and being blessed he had a very good, generous nature. The coachman decided to invite them all to share in his Shabbos meal. So when the synagogue leader approached the poor and homeless to arrange for them to have meals to be placed amongst the town's householders, as was the custom in those days, he got the same answer. "Don't worry, sir. We've already been invited by this coachman." Unfortunately, you can understand that the coachman had limited funds. His funds were far less than his generous heart. And it turned out to be, it was very difficult to believe that, these dozen guests, they left his table, they were hungry. How much could he afford already? He meant well, but he couldn't afford much. So it comes out, the coachman, with his 20 years of experience, with pulling wagons out of mud holes, took upon himself to feed a small army. While the wealthy businessman, whose typically his Shabbos leftovers could easily have fed every hungry man in the town, he found himself floundering around in the ditch. So the previous Rebbe tells this story, and he tells us the following. He sees this coachman and this wealthy guy as an example of ourselves. You see, every one of us, you and me, have a soul, and each of us have been sent down on this world for a mission. And that mission comes with specific aptitudes, talents, and resources to be able to fulfill that role. We have to be careful, says the previous Rebbe, not to become one of those lost souls who wander around haplessly in life. They're trying their hand at all kinds of endeavors except for what is truly inherently their own. So, as in the story, the coachman would have done a great job remaining a coachman. He could have schlepped out that horse from the mud. And the businessman could have very carefully taken care of all those poor people. But when the coachman decided he'd become a person to host big dinners, and the businessman decided he'd start schlepping wagons out of the mud, nobody gained. Not the businessman and not the coachman. And so in life as well. Be careful. We should all be careful. We all have a role. And that role, hopefully as we grow and mature, we realize what we can do, what our aptitudes are, and do the best we can with that role. Not trying to be something that we're not. Because when we're trying not to be, or trying to be something which we're not, nothing happens. Not ourselves, and nobody else is helped. So be careful. And you could say to me, Rabbi, so how do I know what my role is? I'll tell you. I don't have a perfect answer. But I tell you, if a person studies Torah and he hangs out in the right places, he comes to appreciate what his or her role is all about. Good morning to Jed Foreman. Jed Foreman is in Florida. Unbelievable. And Jonathan Wolf, who is saying hello from Chicago. Amazingly, Jonathan, I see where you're traveling. I follow you on Facebook. I get all the updates. Have a wonderful time. My very best to your family. Enjoy. We look forward to having you back. Here's another insight from the previous Rebbe, whose liberation from prison we celebrate today, and the idea of all of us being liberated from our own constraints. And sometimes, my friends, to be honest with you, we place ourselves in constraints. We create environments sometimes where we believe that we are in some sort of a status quo and a holding pattern throughout our lives, which isn't true. A person has the ability to liberate themselves and become bigger, transcend themselves. So here's the ABC of Hasidic thinking. A fascinating story that takes us back to the time of the first Chabad Rebbe in the 1800s, at the time when it was Bonaparte, Napoleon, who was now advancing towards Russia, right, with all of his campaigns. And what happened was there was a particular individual whose name was Rabbi Moshe Meisels. He was a follower of the first Chabad Rebbe. He was an extremely learned person, fluent in German, in Russian, and Polish, and French. And during Napoleon's war in Russia, he served as a translator for the French High Command. Now, Rabbi Shneur Zalman had charged him to associate with the French military officials to attain the position in their service and be in the position to learn what was going on, and bring back information, what was going on to the commanders of the Russian army. So he found himself embedded in the French High Command. And within a short period of time, he succeeded finding favor amongst the chief commanders of the Napoleon's army, and now became privy to their most secret plans. And he was now bringing these information back to the Russians. So this Reb Moshe, who saved the Russian arms arsenal in Vilna because of his information, he alerted the Russian commander in charge, and of course, it was saved. Then he tells us one day, the high command of the French were having a meeting, and they were hotly debating maneuvers and arrangements for the upcoming battle. The maps were spread on the floor, and the generals were examining the roads and the hills, and they weren't sure what to do. Time was short, because tomorrow, at the very least the day after, the battle in Vilna had to begin. They were still debating when suddenly the door flew open, and standing, they thought somebody was going to kill them. And guess who was standing in the doorway? It was Napoleon himself. The emperor's face was dark and fury. He stormed into the room and he raged, "Has the battle been planned? Have the orders to form the flanks been issued?" Then he said, "Who is this stranger?" And he pointed to this Rabbi Meisels. In the flash, Napoleon jumped to his side. "You are a spy for Russia," he thundered. And he placed his hands upon the man's chest to feel the pounding heart of a man who was to be exposed. At that moment, the Aleph Beis, the ABC of Hasidic thinking, stood by him. "What is that?" He explained. "My mind commanded my heart to beat not an increment faster." And in an unwavering voice he said, "The commanders of His Highness the Emperor have taken me as their interpreter. I am knowledgeable in the languages crucial to understanding out and to carrying out the duties." And he was saved. And this, my friend, is the ABC of Hasidic thinking, that a person's mind can truly rule one's heart. And many times we have distractions that come from the heart. Well, along comes the ABC, the Aleph Beis of Hasidic teaching, the cornerstone of Chabad Hasidic approach of life, that every single one of us has the ability to control the mind can control the heart. So again, I want to say hello to all those watching us, and let me just say hello to Alex Rubenstein, to Rick Bullock, wow, to Yisraela, good morning, and who else? To Gus Stivus, fantastic! So happy to have you all join us, and to, of course, all of us listening us. So here's a special invitation announcement to all of us watching and listening. We invite you to join our next Supportive Soul gathering. It's called the Supportive Souls Support Group. It takes place tomorrow, July 15th, at the Chabad of Mineola, from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. This special invitation, this group is open to friends and relatives of individuals suffering from mental disorders, including co-occurring disorders, brain disorders, substance abuse, PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorders. And please feel free to forward this invitation to anyone who you may think can benefit from this group. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call us at 516-739-3636. The actual group is led by Adina and Susan, who are well equipped to help all those who come and join us. So, mental illness in the Jewish community. There are some topics people are happy to discuss with their friends and fellow congregants. in the synagogue at the Kiddush, and unfortunately at times even during the services. Whether it's popular topics including sports teams, the weather, the stock market, recent events, and politics. People might share reactions to the rabbi's sermons or express concern about a member and therefore make a prayer for healing for someone. But sadly, my friends, one of the topics that tends to be off limits is mental illness. We don't generally discuss mental illness openly, and we often choose not to recite a Misha Beirach for people dealing with issues of depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder. By the way, the world is bipolar, the North Pole and the South Pole. Never mind. Substance abuse, eating disorders, schizophrenia, and other mental issues. It's pasnish. We don't talk about these things. Some Jewish communities, mental health professionals and clergy members, really, my friends, are working hard to change this. Mental illness and substance abuse do exist in all parts of the Jewish community. My friends, I've spent more than 25 years as a chaplain in various institutions where I've met men and women of all faiths facing substance abuse and mental issues. So there was a poignant editorial recently in a New York Jewish newspaper that spoke about telling the truth about mental illness. And one particular lady called Ruth Roth tells the story about dealing with her son's first suicide attempt. He made it through that episode alive and with minimal impairment on his body. Once out of the hospital, he appeared to be the same Jonathan he'd always was: kind, loving, caring, bright, engaging, witty. He begged us not to tell anyone what had happened. Not that he needed to. Of course, we would keep this a secret for so many reasons. We didn't want to have our son labeled crazy. We didn't want him to endure any comments or knowing glances from well-meaning people. We were private people. We never revealed our innermost issues to anyone outside our family, and we certainly didn't want our son to feel exposed. Without realizing it, by keeping it a secret, we validated Jonathan's feeling of shame. Not only would he have to battle his illness, he would bear the burden of shame about it as well. From this point on, our family would have to present an outside face to the world that did not represent our inner feeling, our inner reality. We didn't comprehend the weight we would assume with this decision. Would we have acted the same way had Jonathan been diagnosed with a terrible illness or gastro illness, some severe cardiac illness or diabetes? Absolutely not. We would never have hidden any of these illnesses. Ask me now and I will tell you that I wish I had shouted it from the rooftop. Done anything, taken out an ad in the New York Times, she tells. My son has a devastating mental illness. Can someone offer me advice to save his life? Sadly, 5 months later, Jonathan committed suicide. And Ruth Roth continues, having lived with the pain of isolation for the previous 5 months, we decided to be open about Jonathan's taking of his life. This way, our friends could comfort us appropriately. Most important, we would no longer have to bear the burden of living with a lie. It was the right decision for us. Now, Dr. Esther Altman, a New York-based clinical psychologist, tells us, and she writes, and I've been doing some research, she tells us that mental illness is known as Machlat HaNefesh. It's a Hebrew word which means illness of the soul. It doesn't reflect our understanding of the brain, but it captures the essence of what it means to struggle with mental illness for a person or the family. It reminds us that psychological suffering happens to each of us at some junctures, just as we experience Machlat HaGuf, illness of the body. Now the doctor goes on to share the following data on mental illness in any given year here in the United States of America. Approximately 1 in 5 adults, that's 20%, experience some form of mental illness. Approximately 4% experience a serious mental illness that substantially interferes or limits their functioning in one or more major life activity. It goes on, my friends. 1% of adults live with schizophrenia. 2.6% of adults live with bipolar disorder. 7% of adults have had at least one major depressive episode in the past year. 6% of adult population reported heavy drinking. Suicide is now the leading cause of death for young people between the ages of 15 through 24. Thinking back, my friends, as the rabbi in the community of Mineola, Chabad of Mineola, I think one of the most saddest times, as much as I've been involved with the NYU Winthrop Hospital and many other sad situations, I think the toughest was parents came to see me about their daughter, about this issue. And we tried. And the saddest thing was that a few days later she was found near the Mineola train station on the tracks. Yeah, my friends, this is something we have to think about. The numbers and the stories are alarming in the general population and in the Jewish community. Articles in the Jewish media, presentations and conversations at Jewish conferences, programs at synagogues and at communal gatherings are starting to raise awareness and offer hope. In August of 2013, Times of Israel blogger Diane Weber-Bederman wrote openly about her mental illness in a revealing piece. Go and check it out. Where she writes about, under the heading, Mental Illness and the Jews. I write about mental illness because I have one, she tells us. I am a third-generation mental health survivor. I am named for my paternal grandmother, Devorah, and she had depression, as did my father. I was diagnosed in my late 40s with chronic, recurrent depression. That means there are times when everything is ticky-boo, and other times they are very dark. I was diagnosed when I was suicidal. Stephen Fried, author of a bestseller called A Common Struggle, a personal journey through the past and future of mental illness and addiction, suggests ways to make the issue more central in the Jewish world. And he writes a provocative article called Jews Must Take Mental Illness Out of the Shadows. And in it he asks, what messages do we send to our congregations every day about mental illness and addiction? Do we, for example, believe in prayers for healing diseases of the brain the same way we do for all other diseases? Do we believe in mourning deaths from the tragic outcomes of these illnesses, suicides, overdoses? And just as a sidebar, this issue comes to my way many times when people have lost a child or a person to a suicide, whether they need to sit or should they be sitting shiva. And I say absolutely. Absolutely, my friends. Yeah, and the answer is, you got to think about these things seriously. The same way we do for all other diseases, mental illness has to be treated the same way. Do we regularly include these diseases in health and wellness that we pray for and wish for others? Do our rabbis and community members offer hospital or home medical visits for these illnesses? I find it the toughest going to visit, because in many of these institutions, they're locked up and you need a lot of pull to be allowed in at a certain time. And there's places here on Long Island, quite a few places. So this Mr. Dr. Fried suggests, regarding the Mishaberach prayer, imagine the incredible power of hearing a congregation ask, as prayers do, for compassion, for restoration, for strength, for healing of the soul and the healing of the body, and knowing that they're talking about you and your illness too. Synagogues can bring these topics into the open by creating opportunities for awareness, discussion, and networking. Mental health support networks are an essential way to keep families feeling less isolated and ostracized. Possible support might include discussions and committees to organize help for those with postpartum depression and anxiety, suicide prevention training, mental health first aid treatment, a Brias HaNefesh, a spiritual health support group, mental health awareness Shabbatons, sessions for teens on body image and eating disorders, and so much more. So, my friends, it's so important, as leaders in psychiatry see an important role for rabbis and Jewish communal professionals in this area. And they stress that the forging alliances with culturally competent and informed providers can be a huge help, not only for those in need of support, but also for the rabbis and the leaders. And they suggest that it behooves rabbis and other community leaders who are held in such esteem and respect to become familiar with the common health issues, challenges, and illnesses. Depression, anxiety, substance abuse are very common, and early identification and treatment can be a key to long-term recovery. There are several initiatives and training programs geared specifically for clergy. I take every opportunity to attend these meetings in Manhattan and other places, and to understand how to deal with this. Most curricula combine clinical knowledge and Jewish texts to help identify and build resources to support the psychological issues that leaders are likely to encounter in communal settings. Furthermore, there are programs working with young groups, with youth groups, elderly people to address the topic of mental health in children and teenagers and raising awareness around the issues of mental health and working to end the stigma of mental illness. While the issue of mental health and mental illness is still in the background in much of the Jewish community, there are reasons for hope. As the topic comes to the forefront, I've seen myself in conferences at the Chabad annual gathering of the Shluchim. We gather once a year, both the men and the women, the Shluchim and the Shluchais, and each year they always have special sessions and special programs and presenters on this very issue, how to deal with it. So it's in community forums and rabbinical training programs. So as the Jewish community continues to tackle this complex issue, I promise you, lives are being enhanced and hopefully even saved. And that is why, again, I offer this special invitation, this announcement, this PSA. Please join us at our next Supportive Souls Support Group. This has been going on for quite a few months now, and I come to you, to the wider community, to let you know when everyone is welcome. It meets once a month at the moment. The first Monday, so the Monday now is tomorrow, July the 15th, at the Chabad of Mineola. It's in the morning from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m., 2 hours. Everything is kept confidential. And if you need more information, you have questions about this, this is, you can call us at 516-739-3636 to learn more about this. And again, it's a very, very serious issue that I want everyone to know about, that we are taking a lead here in Nassau County, as many others as well. But and we do include a Misha Berach. We encourage people to let us know, confidentially if they wish, that when we make a Misha Berach, we're also including those not only in the typical illnesses, but also mental illness as well. Again, this group is open to friends and relatives of individuals suffering from mental disorders, including co-occurring disorders, brain disorders, substance abuse, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorders. And please feel free to forward this invitation to anyone who may benefit from this group. Any questions, please call me at 516-739-3636. The support souls are led by Adina and Susan, well equipped in this area. Thank you. This is your host, Rabbi Pearl, wishing you all the best. Thank you, and only good news to everybody.